The year is 1700. Rome, no longer the empire that once conquered the world, but still the city every European prince, poet, and dreamer longed to see. Travelers arrived on the grand tour, a rite of passage for the wealthy, and a source of envy for everyone else. They sketched ruins, studied Latin, and pretended to understand Italian wine etiquette. For centuries, the world called Rome the Eternal City, and in the 1700s, it truly lived up to that name. A place where the ancient and the modern coexisted like uneasy roommates sharing a palace. Thanks to AI technology, we can now rebuild what time has softened, to see Baroque Rome as its citizens did. Vibrant, crowded, and alive with laughter, smoke, and church bells. Let's walk through the Rome of the 1700s and discover a city caught between decadence and devotion. Nothing symbolized Rome's power better than St. Peter's Basilica. Bernini's vast colonnades curved like arms, embracing the faithful arriving from across Europe. Pilgrims lined up beneath the Roman sun for a glimpse of salvation. And perhaps more importantly, some shade. Inside, the air was thick with scented smoke and murmured prayers. Tourists tilted their heads so far back they nearly invented physical therapy, staring up at Michelangelo's impossible dome. Gold dripped from ceiling to altar. Choirs rose to meet it in sound. Here, faith was as grand as architecture itself. A reminder that while the Roman Empire had fallen, the church remained its eternal successor. Outside, street vendors sold souvenirs and miracles in equal measure. The Tiber has always been Rome's lifeline, and its nightmare. In the 1700s, it was both a highway and a hazard, swollen each winter until it spilled into the streets. Barges carried wine from Tuscany, grain from the Campagna, and news from distant ports. Along its banks stood makeshift taverns and laundry lines strung between broken walls. Women beat clothes clean against stones that once built temples. Children chased after the waterfront rats that were as much part of the city as its marble. At sunset, the river turned gold. Painters crowded the bridges trying to capture it, each swearing theirs was closest to the truth. Rome loved the Tiber the way you love a relative who borrows money and never pays it back. It caused endless trouble, but life felt empty without it. By day or night, Piazza Navona was an open-air theater of vanity and beauty. Once a Roman stadium, the square had become the social epicenter of Baroque Rome, where artists, aristocrats, and pickpockets performed side by side. Bernini's Fountain of the Four Rivers erupted from the center, its marble giants posing with the confidence of actors who knew they'd never be outshined. Cardinals paraded in velvet robes, street musicians improvised Mozart by ear, and children splashed in the water their parents could barely afford. At night, lamps reflected in the wet stones, and the city seemed to breathe with its own soft light. It was tacky, holy, and irresistible, the perfect definition of Rome. The Pantheon was already 16 centuries old, and still the youngest building in town. Step inside, and you entered geometry made divine. The oculus above a perfect opening to heaven, and sometimes the rain. When sunlight cut through the smoke of candles, it formed a single beam that moved across the floor like a silent sundial. Visitors arriving from Paris or Vienna stood in awe. Romans stood in line to sell them guidebooks. This is where Raphael was buried, the artist who made beauty look effortless. Every echo inside the Pantheon reminded you that Rome's greatest achievement was its ability to be reborn without reinventing itself. Completed in 1725, the Spanish Steps turned a steep hill into Europe's favorite meeting place. They joined the French Church of Trinità dei Monti to the Spanish embassy below, a marble peace treaty between rivals who both claimed God's favor. Artists set up easels, merchants sold flowers, and nobles pretended their carriages had stopped by accident. The polished steps were Rome's most popular seat, for conversation, courtship, or simply for being seen. At sunset, the view over the city was worth any sermon. and perhaps just as inspirational. Even the stray dogs seemed to understand that they were part of an eternal painting. Before it became Rome's most famous fountain, Trevi was a construction site that never seemed to end. For decades, marble columns stood half-finished, and scaffolding clung to the facade like a spider's web. Architect Nicola Salvi took over in 1732 and spent 30 years proving that perfection takes as long as it wants. When the water finally flowed, Neptune emerged triumphant from a storm of stone horses, his chariot riding the roar of Rome itself. Locals grumbled about the cost but could not resist its majesty. Even today, people throw coins into the pool. In 1750, Romans probably threw tax receipts. If St. Peter's was Rome's spirit, Campo de Fiori was its mouth and stomach. From dawn until noon, hawkers filled the square with cries and color. Tomatoes the size of fists, bright lemons from Sicily, fish still flopping on the wooden stalls. Aristocrats' servants bargained beside housewives and thieves. Everyone haggled, few won. The air smelled of basil and soap, of wine and work, and yes, sometimes of horses. By evening, the same square belonged to storytellers, gamblers, and the occasional philosopher trying to explain it all. A century later, Giordano Bruno's statue would watch over this place, a silent reminder of a man who died for saying too much in a city that never shuts up. The Colosseum in the 1700s stood half in ruins, half in imagination. Ivy and silence covered the seats where crowds once roared. Scholars debated how many lions it took to entertain an empire. Locals debated how many stones they could safely steal for building homes. Artists painted it at sunset, each sure they'd found the perfect angle of melancholy. Grand tourists posed among fallen arches, reciting bad Latin to their tutors, who pretended to be impressed. When dusk fell and wind whispered through the corridors, it was easy to believe the ghosts still performed spectacles for anyone who listened. No other ruin made decay look so majestic. The Forum was Rome's open-air archive, columns and capitals scattered like pages of a story too good to throw away. In the 1700s, cows grazed between the temples and peasants used broken statues as stools. Excavations had barely begun. No one knew what lay beneath all that soil, only that it belonged to grandeur. From the Capitoline Hill above, redesigned by Michelangelo, you could see Rome layer upon layer. Ancient columns supporting medieval towers, modern houses built from imperial bricks. It was an accidental city of centuries, each refusing to retire quietly. If history had a skyline, this was it. Across the Tiber lay Trastevere, the district that never bowed to any pope or prince. Its narrow streets smelled of olive oil and freedom. Here lived fishermen, bakers and painters who preferred warm wine to cold manners. Laundry fluttered above alleyways like unofficial flags of the neighborhood. Children played ball outside ancient churches. Arguments started loud and ended with a toast. When night came, the windows filled with music and the stone streets glowed as if they'd learned to hold on to sunlight. Trastevere was Rome with its hair down, messy, beautiful, and absolutely alive. Beyond the markets and tenements, the palaces of the 1700s hummed with creative competition. Popes became patrons and collectors on an imperial scale. Clement XI expanded the Vatican Museum. Benedict XIV opened art to the public. A radical notion in an age when beauty belonged to the elite. Young Antonio Canova carved statues so lifelike they seemed on the verge of blushing. Piranesi engraved ruins that made viewers believe stone had dreams. Music poured from private concerts where visiting masters played for cardinals and countesses. Rome thrived on faith and ambition in equal measure. Its sins funded its genius. Every visitor left the city richer in story than in money, and that tradition has never changed. The Rome of the 1700s was a city in transition. Ancient ruins standing beside new domes, priests sharing streets with painters, and commerce thriving under the shadow of saints. It was a city that polished its own decay into style and sold eternity by the souvenir. Walk its streets today, and you'll still hear the echo of those centuries. The laughter, the pigeons, the hammer on marble. Rome has outlived its empires, its invaders, and yes, most of its tour guides, but it has never outlived its audience. Which city should we bring back next? Tell us in the comments. Your hometown might be the next stop on our journey through time. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the past.